Hi, everybody. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're talking about higher education, post-secondary, and workforce issues in Florida, what passed this session, what didn't pass, and some of the issues that Florida leaders are looking at in the next couple of years. We have an awesome panel today. I'm going to introduce them or have them introduce themselves in just a minute. But my name is Sara Clements. I'm a Vice President of State Government Relations at McGuire-Woods Consulting, based here in Tallahassee in our Florida office. I work mostly on education and got into policy and advocacy starting as a teacher in Orange County. Just a quick housekeeping note. You do have the ability to ask questions. We should have time for audience Q&A at the end. So you can go ahead and type in your questions as you think of them, and then whatever time is left, we will go through those. We're also recording the webinar, and we'll have this available later if you want to go back and look at anything. And we will also be sending out a summary that combines K-12 and higher ed issues that passed in the legislature, so you should get an email with that update on some of those bills if we don't discuss them today. So with that, I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, tell us name, title, what is your role, and a little bit of background on how you got into education. You want to start with the Chancellor? Chancellor, can you hear us?
Found the button. Thanks very much, Sara. It's great to be here with all of you today, this esteemed panel. I'm grateful to be on it and have the opportunity to talk with everyone today. I'm Kathy Hebda. I have the great privilege of being the Chancellor of the Florida College System, which means I'm the Division Director of the Division of Florida Colleges in the Department of Education. And I got into education as a teacher. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in music education with a choral emphasis. So I used to teach middle school chorus. And then moved back to Tallahassee, and there wasn't a music job, and I got on a DOE a number of years ago, and I've been there ever since.
Awesome. Chair Plasencia.
So my name is Rene Plasencia. I'm a former member of the Florida House of Representatives, and also a former teacher, taught social studies, mostly in the high school, for 15 years, also in Orange County, much like Sara did, before running for office and being elected to the Florida House. Obviously spent a lot of time in K-12 policy. And for the last 2 years, I had the honor of chairing the Higher Education's Appropriations Subcommittee.
Thank you. Clay.
Coach P and Chancellor, good to see you both, and Sara. Clay Ingram, I'm the Chief Legislative Affairs Officer at Florida State University. I came from Volunteer Florida, where I was an appointee by Governor DeSantis and had the chance to work with the Chancellor briefly before I transitioned here. And then before that, served in the House of Representatives with Coach P, and great experience. And I actually did briefly after college teach and coach for a little while, again, similar background to Coach P. And then had the chance, and the legislature mainly focused on transportation, tourism, economic development funding. This committee I chaired most of the time I was there, but great to be back in higher education and to advocate for what I think is the greatest university in the state of Florida. So thanks for having me today, Sara.
Go Seminoles. Proud graduate of the Florida State University. Okay, so we're going to start with an easy question first to all of our panelists, which is, what were your priorities or your institution or agency's priorities going into the 2022 session? So what were you focused on, and what were the results of those at the end of session? Whoever wants to start.
Chancellor Hebda, you can go first.
I was just going to say we should defer to you, Coach P, as the legislator on the panel. So I would happily defer to you.
Okay, I will. So, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Going into a budget cycle, you don't necessarily know what to expect, especially in the last 2 years. The year before last, we were under the impression that we would have to cut a lot of money out of our higher education budget. And in doing so, that would have a ripple effect on everything that happened in workforce development, and from our state colleges to our universities all the way down to our tech centers. this year, obviously we know that didn't happen, thankfully, with a lot of help from the federal government. That didn't happen our first year. This year, we weren't sure what the budget cycle would look like, and it looked really good, in large part because of decisions that were made by our executive office, by the governor and his staff throughout the pandemic that brought a lot of revenue to our state and keeping our state open, but also the federal dollars that we got as well. So it was a great budget year. That being said, we were looking at labor shortages, and I know that there are labor shortages in all industries, but the one industry that we decided to focus on in my subcommittee, Higher Ed Approps, was the labor shortage in nursing. And so a great deal of what we did in our largest programs, one of this is called the Line program, the other one's called the Pipeline, focused on nursing and the workforce, the labor shortage on nursing. And it drew in between that and the budget items, individual budget items that we have in the final budget, upwards over $150 million just to combat the nursing labor shortage.
Awesome. Clay, why don't you go next?
Sure, happy to. And I'll say that we are excited about the Line and Pipeline programs. I think that I know our College of Nursing, we have a new dean who comes to the state of Florida with a great deal of enthusiasm and her having potentially a new funding source to help address that need in the state of Florida is exciting, and I hope Florida State gets to play a role there. And I want to thank Coach P for the hard work on the Line and Pipeline program. So essentially, and Coach P knows as well, because we came to him with these asks. But the largest thing that we started with was operational support funding. It was a large part of what we thought could move the university forward and help us play a role in helping economic growth in the state. It's funding that would help us achieve AAU readiness status, which would put us in the elite of research universities. To do that, we need to hire the very best faculty, recruit the very best faculty, bring them here, have the very best lab space and additional lab space, additional equipment. And that funding allowed us to do that. We ultimately were able to achieve that funding thanks to our partners in the legislature. Another thing that's very exciting that sort of was an outgrowth of that as we look to grow was the fact that some of the top research universities have teaching hospitals, academic health centers. That's something that Florida State didn't have. And the legislature gave us funding to create the FSU Health system, perhaps, but like a facility at the very least, which would be a facility where we could bring in, again, the best medical physicians and faculty to teach, practice, and then conduct their research on campus. And that helps us draw down NIH funding and really helps us as a university take a step forward into, we're already an R1 research university, but it helps us be where we would like to be. So, and we were able to, thankful to all of our supporters in the legislature, we're able to get the things that we asked for and needed. So very, very grateful. And it was a great session. We're grateful to our partners in the legislature for their help.
Certainly helps when you have the largest budget in Florida history,
$112
billion.
And that's a huge contrast to like Coach P was saying, to just not that long ago when we thought there were going to be terrible recurring cuts. And so we're so grateful to be where we are now.
Absolutely.
Hey, if I can just touch on that contrast real quick. When I first became chair, I was told, I was asked if we could cut $1 billion from higher education. And so that was the exercise that we went through, kind of like a doomsday exercise. And it was pretty sobering. So to be where we're at now is, it's a blessing, knowing where we started from and seeing where we ended.
Absolutely. Chancellor, what were the colleges focused on this year?
Thanks. I would start by just echoing those comments that we are amazed at where we are right now with education funding, and particularly the things that the legislature put into the college system budget this year. It has been always been a priority because our colleges were established decades ago to have funding, and the state board continued to request maintenance dollars for the colleges just to keep things repaired and up to date and redo buildings and facilities where they needed it to make sure they can offer the programs that are needed. And this year, the legislature clearly went far and above what the state board had requested in that area for the college system. So I know the institutions are really excited about that, and we are very grateful for that too. So that was one of the main priorities for funding, and certainly to maintain performance funding and those sorts of things. And all of those things came through in the GAA. So we're grateful for all of that. The agency, the whole agency, DOE, didn't have any substantive legislative priorities specifically for the college system. It was mostly budgetary. And Bethany probably talked about the K-12 issues that we were supporting and following last year. I will tell you, we're pretty excited about the law enforcement bill, HB 7, because where our colleges train law enforcement officers and other first responders. And so we're really excited about that opportunity to recruit and train more police officers.
Can you just share a quick overview of what that bill does, or that policy?
Sure, it does a number of things. And as I said, it talks about recruitment. It looks at recruiting individuals who are Florida residents into law enforcement academies, and also has plans for those who might be in other similar occupations and maybe live in other states, to recruit those high performers into specifically being trained as a law enforcement officer. Perhaps there's some other different kind of first responder or law enforcement, in a different kind of law enforcement position, but this would specifically train them to be a police officer. And so they also provide for bonuses in the legislation. There's a lot of things in there. It's very, very comprehensive. And you can tell it's something that is not going to be just for 1 year. It was really one of those bills that looks at how do we support law enforcement for years to come.
Well, and we've talked for years about wanting Florida to be the most military friendly and veteran friendly state in the country. And I feel like, just law enforcement in general, the governor and legislature has done a lot to prioritize that, make it a place where those folks feel respected, want to live and work. So while we're talking about workforce, we've talked about a couple workforce issues, the nursing shortage, law enforcement. The legislature has done a ton. I was just going back and looking over the past 3 years, how much pretty big legislation has been passed. Last year we created the REACH office. I always forget what it stands for, Reimagining Education and Career Help, which is an entirely new office within the governor's office that is dedicated to bridging the gap between all the different agencies that touch workforce. We have the Department of Education, we have the Department of Economic Opportunity, we have career source centers around the country, we have college system, the school districts, we've got all these different programs from apprenticeships to and various incentives and all these things, industry certifications. I mean, the list goes on, but are all these programs, how are they working together? Are we able to kind of see the data and the performance and all those things? We had a huge CTE audit a couple of years ago, created the Sail to 60 program a couple of years ago. We're trying to get 60% of Floridians to have a, high value credential or certification. So, my question to you all is, how transformative are these programs? I mean, is this really a big deal? Are we going to see a big impact of results from that stuff? Or are we still kind of tinkering around the edges and there's a lot more to do? And if so, what else should we be doing in that area?
Do you want me to go first again?
Whoever wants to take that on.
I'll go first. I think it'll have a huge impact on our state and the people who live here. And, I think one of the agencies that you failed to mention was Department of Children and Families. So DCF is a part of that as well. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because what we're looking at tapping into are communities who have often been overlooked in our state and around the country. Low income areas where there may not be access to upward mobility through whether it's credentialing or badging, or just getting an AA or a bachelor's degree for a lot of reasons, for a multitude of reasons. And so what the creation of this REACH office will do, it'll create a system where the individuals at the center of all of these agencies and all of these programs. It's there's a clever word used for it. It's like a no wrong door approach, I think it's called, where regardless of where you reach out for help, if it's tied to any kind of workforce initiative or program, you're immediately connected to the three different agencies, DCF, DOE, and DEO, and obviously CareerSource falls under DEO. And you're given the resources and provided with options of how to help yourself move you and your family into a better career, so that what's available to everyone in this state is also available to you. And I would say it's it was a legislative initiative, but it's something that has been talked about by everybody, whether it's the DOE or the Florida Chamber. Oftentimes hear Mark Wilson talk about the 25 most impoverished zip codes in the state and what we have to do. We have to meet them there. I mean, we have state colleges who have taken initiatives upon themselves. The one that comes to me often is the Broward Up program, where they go into these communities and they provide these certification courses within the same community centers or at a church or at any kind of facility where they can partner with someone in that community. But it's making sure that we bring the resources that we have in our state and the world-class education that we provide in our state to those who have some kind of impediment to accessing it.
Well, it's funny, you mentioned Broward Up. I believe Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the U.S. Secretary were just at Broward College talking about Broward Up and how that could be, kind of a model, I think, for other places. And maybe the Chancellor can talk a little bit about that. Anything else to add?
Well, I can add a lot, but what I will mention is in speaking to a lot of the state college presidents, many of our state colleges do have programs similar to Broward Up. They just don't have a great catchy name for it. But a lot of them are thinking outside the box, and they are working with their community to make sure that they're making inroads in those community. But this REACH Act and the REACH Office and what it eventually will do, because there are a lot of things that need to be done within now and the next 5 years to really realize the impact of it.
And on that note, I failed to mention talking about investing in the state and whether it will have an impact. The legislature put in $100 million last year for the current budget for this consumer first workforce information system that does connect those three agencies. And they put an additional $150 million in this year. And that is a multi-year, like a five-year long process. But if that doesn't show a commitment by the state to really, make a difference there, I mean, that $250 million is not a drop in the bucket. So pretty exciting.
Sarah, I'd love to comment on the REACH Act for
yes, please do.
too. And thanks, Coach P. I hope this is recorded because I'd love to play back everything you just said about the Florida college system. Is fantastic. I could do a whole webinar just on Broward Up. If any of my team members are logged on right now, they're probably rolling their eyes going, oh, here she goes again. Because it is just a fantastic program. It's just, and TCC they adopted 32304 and everybody's got something they do locally like Broward Up. What struck me about that program in particular is the way they went about it, which was looking at the data, and where they had locations and campuses and centers was not where the people who needed them most were living and working. And so they now have, as I say, planted the flag for Broward College, where people have to trip over it in those neighborhoods. And now they talk about going to college in places where they didn't. And that's the beauty of all this. And what I think is one of the things I think is so great about the REACH Act is that it imagines college as not just one kind of university or college experience, but it really is all of post-secondary education. and making sure that, as Coach P said, there's no wrong door for any Floridian, wherever they live, should be able to access training in the area they need for upward economic mobility. And so just to have a bill started on that premise is fantastic enough. And then, of course, there are a lot of great programs that are in there, including the one you mentioned about the database that will connect everybody. So yeah, we do think transformative is a word used a lot for it. A number of programs will come out of that, and I think people are already being served better because of how people approach the thinking now about outreach and every Floridian differently.
Hey, Sarah, can I add a couple of things?
Yeah.
So, we all see all the rankings. We know that our public college, university, higher education system is ranked #1 in the nation, and rightfully so. What a lot of people don't get to see is what I've been able to see over the last 2 years. Chairing that subcommittee, I was able to meet with just about every college president from our state college system, almost every state university president, trustee members, alumni, just about everyone from the Department of Education. And it's amazing to see the incredible and talented people who are all working towards one goal, and that's providing the best resources for the people of the state and the people who come here from other states to access our higher education system. Oftentimes you get elected and you get into a position where you have a certain amount of authority and you come in with all these great ideas. And, I was no different, but what I learned very quickly is that what was already taking place was incredible. And really the biggest thing we can do is kind of stay out of their way and make sure they have the proper funding, and make sure that there's a continued dialogue, that we're all working together between the legislature, the governor's office, DOE, and the institutions on the ground. But it's just a great testament to the talent that we have in this state across the board, from our agency to our institutions. It's really incredible, and it was really just an honor to be in a position where I can experience that.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. You mentioned that the U.S. News and World Report, I think for 5-6 years in a row, has named Florida's higher education system the best in the country. I think this year, 2022, we had 5 institutions in the top 100. FAMU is the #1 HBCU in the country in the same rankings. Our college system continues to get nominated in the top 10 for the Aspen Prize. Several colleges have won the Aspen Prize. And yet we have some of the cheapest tuition in the country. And just a couple of days ago, the state university system released a statement, March 30th. The average cost right now for a 4-year degree from a state university system is less than $2,000 over 4 years. Now that includes financial aid, but $2,000 for a bachelor's degree is really pretty crazy. And that's a decrease 5 years in a row. And the rest of the country has gone up 17% in tuition rates, and ours has held flat since 2014-15, which makes Florida the second lowest state in the country for tuition for 4-year public institutions. And I see this, my background is more in K-12, and we see this in K-12. We've actually we rank sometimes very low in K-12 on funding per student, but yet our performance is always high, and especially when you look at gains by students, and especially in low income and disadvantaged demographics, they continue to outperform the rest of the nation. So that's a long wind up to say, what do you credit Florida, student and schools' performance to, given that tuition is so low? Obviously, there is financial aid. The state is investing a lot, but given how affordable it is for students, how are we still able to perform as well as we have?
Sarah, I think you nailed it with one of your last comments, that obviously, inflationary pressures affect colleges and universities. Just expenses go up. And so our focus has to be on, ensuring that the quality of education is as elite as it can be. And then the legislature and the governor have alleviated that inflationary pressure and the expenses by continuing to invest, through funding education. Our new president, tends to look at the legislature as he talks often about how would you act if you received, a $400 million gift that might, produce, a $20 million, dividend annually. You would go nuts and you dance in the streets, and so that's sort of how we feel about the legislature continuing to invest in higher education. It allows us to produce a quality product and you can take the pressure off the student as well. Students with regard to the concern of tuition increases. If it wasn't for that, I know it's a simple answer to a big proposal, but if it wasn't for that commitment by the legislature to fund higher education at the level that they have, we wouldn't be able to continue to produce.
And Sara,
I'll second that. Please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chancellor, did you want to?
No, please go ahead.
So in addition to that, we're taking a look at any increases in fees as well. I know Representative Mariano had a bill this past year, HB 7051, which makes some changes into how you can increase fees on students, adds a little more transparency to that. I think it requires a supermajority vote by trustee members whenever there's an increase. And then when you take a look at the cost of textbooks as well. So this year we created what's called the SOAR program. It's a just over $10 million grant that the state universities and state colleges have access to that will allow them to accelerate what they've already been doing, and that's creating open educational resources. And in some institutions, just about every single one of them have some form or another. These institutions are able to provide to their students their educational resources, is essentially kind of like textbooks, at low cost or no cost to those students. That's something we've been working on for years, even prior to my time in the legislature. But this year we have a grant in order to accelerate that process. The grant was worked on by Dr. Opper from the library system for the state of Florida, and as well as a number of our professors from a couple of our universities, both FIU and UCF, who helped craft that program. But in addition to trying to keep tuition low, we're trying to keep fees and we're trying to keep the cost of textbooks down as well, because we know that housing continues to be a very an increase in cost to our families and our students, and just the price inflation in general, the price of food and gas and everything else that you need to live. But in addition to that, I think it's also important to understand that it's a very fine line that we're walking in not increasing tuition. The university still, you can't run a university without money. You can't run a state college without money. If you're competing against other universities and other college for the best faculty in the world, then you have to pay them what they're worth. And so that is not lost on us either. That's why when we have an opportunity to give more money, to invest more money into our state colleges and state universities, you see it like you did this year, because we know that it takes money to produce the best university and college system in the nation.
Absolutely. And I failed to mention just another tidbit that I find so interesting, just because student debt is such a point of discussion, nationally, and should we forgive student loan debt, the student loan crisis? We just hear these terms a lot. So another just fun fact is that 17,000 fewer students, resident undergraduate students this year, took out loans than in 2021. And 75% of resident undergrad students in Florida did not take a loan at all, which I think is pretty awesome to be able to go. And I think that is a testament to Bright Futures and the other resources that we're making available to students, and as well through the individual universities and colleges. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Hey, Sara, another interesting,
yeah.
Some interesting data, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I just remember when I spoke to Dr. Opper, and we had, I think, workshops on this in our subcommittee. But the amount of students who are either sharing textbooks with friends or just opting not to purchase the textbook at all because they can't afford it. So, we have to continue to look at what the cost to our families are, because it's more than just tuition. There's a much broader conversation around that to be had. We are having those conversations. It is great that we're keeping our tuition low. I think it speaks to the leadership that we've had, but beginning with Governor Scott and leading into now with Governor DeSantis, and a commitment by the legislature as well. But we do have to understand that there are serious concerns with the affordability, even in our state, for some of our students.
Sarah, I would just echo those comments, and to answer even your original question, I really think it comes down to two things, and it comes down to the first. Coach P just not just said it, but demonstrated it: leadership at every level. Governor, legislator, our university and college presidents, their staff, their teams, everybody is committed to affordability and excellence at the same time, and they are focused on students. That's the same thing in K-12. The reason why the performance is good and resources are used efficiently is because we're focused on students and what they need. And so Coach P is right. There are plenty of things we still need to do, and we can't take our eye off the ball. But we're here now because of those things.
Absolutely. Okay. So you mentioned, I know what it was. I just forgot what I was thinking. So talking about college affordability, and you mentioned Governor Scott. Do you all remember, obviously in 2012, he proposed this challenge for a $10,000 degree for a four-year degree through the colleges. I'm just curious, Chancellor, do you know how many of those programs are around?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I can tell you this: the colleges not only selected certain programs to meet that challenge, but they also just rearranged how they did some of their finances. So students who would get close to the end, if they were going to hit that cap or go over that cap of 10,000, whatever program they were in, they would make sure they were scholarshiped or whatever they needed to make sure they got that degree for less than $10,000. And we still ask when a new workforce baccalaureate is proposed, how the college is going to meet the $10,000 challenge.
Yeah, I did read that, and I don't know if it still exists, but Broward College had one or maybe a few degree programs, and basically the way it worked is, if you met certain criteria throughout your first 3 years, then they just paid for your fourth year of education, which was $4,000, which is pretty cool, because now you're incentivizing students to really take it seriously the first 3 years, and you could
Right.
save that much money.
Helps with student retention and everything else. It's a great way to do it.
Mm-hmm. So let me take us in a little bit of a different direction. This is more of a personal question for Clay. You were in the state legislature. You had to meet with people like yourself who come around and talk about the needs and priorities of colleges, universities, workforce programs. How has it been different, on the other side? What are the things that you wish you could tell yourself back then, or that you would tell legislators now, as someone who's been in both roles, as a lawmaker and now as an advocate for an institution?
Sure. Globally, I'll tell you, it's interesting, different to be on the other side of the desk and have less of a sense of control about an issue that you're working on. So that's a strange adjustment, and I know Coach P will get that soon. But sort of like at a more granular level, I'd say being on campus, a pleasant surprise, and then something that I think I'd like to try to push and continue to help the legislature understand. I'm constantly pleasantly surprised at how efficient I feel like FSU is, and that's probably true of our sister universities as well. And I've experienced the same thing in K-12, that, when you get to a school, I think sometimes you think things are a certain way, or you might see waste, or you might see inefficiencies. But I've been very, very pleasantly surprised that I feel like FSU, as an example, a hope, and is probably true across the system, is run very efficiently. So that's been a pleasant surprise and something that I think that we as a state should be proud of. I'm sure it's true of the state colleges too.
I've heard you're very friendly with everyone on campus, and you even know like all of the lunch ladies and everyone in the cafeteria, and you're always introducing people to them, which
I'd
is
love to know
awesome.
how you know that. But the cafeteria is a short walk down the hill, so I do spend a lot of time there when session's not in. You would never know it by looking at me, right?
It's awesome. Okay, for Chair Plasencia, so for those who are maybe out of Florida in the audience, he announced right after session ended that he was resigning. He's officially resigned. You've been in the House for 8 years. You chaired the Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee the last 2 years. You came into this role as a teacher, as a coach. What are you most proud of? What are the accomplishments you're most proud of during your time? And is there anything that you would ask, future leaders to work on that you were not able to accomplish during your time?
Yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny, I was having lunch today with Representative Hawkins, and he asked me the same question. And he asked Representative LaRosa, because he's friends with Mike, the same question as well. Is there anything that you didn't accomplish that you would want to be able to work on if you had an opportunity? I've had that question asked to me a couple of times over the last couple of weeks since I resigned from office. And much like Clay, I've passed a lot of bills into law, some very important, some that were very powerful, dealt with people's lives on a very real level, whether it was making sure that the widows of law enforcement, first responders who were not on the traditional pension plan still receive death benefits for life. That was a tough one. Clay was in office when we were able to pass that one. I can point out a lot of bills that I feel really proud of, but I think the most important thing that I'm most proud of is how I treated people, how I treated everyone from the sergeants, the lobbyists who came to on behalf of their clients to speak with us, parents or constituents who came just to talk to us because they were concerned about something. I think the most important thing we do is set an example of how your public servants should be working for you. And oftentimes, it's unfortunate, but some people can get in a position that they believe they have authority, because at the end of the day, none of us really have authority over anything. But it gets to their head and they start treating people differently. But I think the thing I'm most proud of is I've always been the same person since before I got elected. And that's always been important to me.
Good answer. Well, I think I'm going to ask one more question, and then we've got some audience questions. So this is going back to the college system. I don't know, because higher ed, I'm not as steeped, how other states divide up their colleges, universities. But in Florida, we have the Board of Governors that oversees the state university system, and then the Florida college system is within our state Department of Education. So it is overseen by the Commissioner of Education, Richard Corcoran, who is also leaving us soon. So my question is for the Chancellor. Another thing that we so frequently talk about is the link between K-12 and higher education, or K-12 and workforce. Do you feel that having the Florida college system within the commissioner's purview does make that transition or that bridge easier? And do you feel like the colleges really are able to kind of communicate with the K-12 system and make that an easier transition and really understand the needs of K-12 and so forth?
I appreciate the question. Every state is a little bit different. And I think it's been, I'll use Coach P's word, a blessing. I think it's been fantastic for us to be under the State Board of Education. Every once in a while, somebody will say, hey, wish we had our old board again, or something like that, when they for different reasons, but by and large, it's a great system for just the reasons you outlined, Sarah, because it brings the consistency under one board. It brings the vision of pre-K to 20 under one board. It makes sense for the universities to have a separate system. There's a whole different setup for them and different history for them. But the colleges originally were birthed out of the school districts a long, long time ago. And so it really is, it helps with dual enrollment. We have one of the largest dual enrollment programs, if not the largest in the country. Over 80,000 students complete dual enrollment every year, 87% of which through the college system, taking hundreds of thousands of credits every single year. We have that, we have career dual enrollment, we have the connection with school district technical centers or colleges and the Florida college system, all the workforce deans and the programs they work on together. Is there more work to do? There always is. And that's why I think Florida is #1 in the nation, is because we never rest. We always see the next thing and we're constantly improving. But those relationships that we have and the ability of the state board to really see all of it and how it works together is really invaluable.
Okay, we got a few questions, and if you have not added your question, please do so. This is a great question from someone who's watching. She says, as a graduate student completing a policy proposal that is in direct alignment with Sail to 60 and economic mobility, are there resources for me to access on the program, on the progress of that program? Anyone know the answer to that?
I can add one thing that might be helpful, because the program was back before it became statutory, was something that really had started out of the studies by the Lumina Foundation. And so a lot of the data we rely on, particularly to measure at least the nationwide data when we measure against other states, we'll rely on the Lumina Foundation data. We certainly have access to our own data in Florida and can look at degrees and things like that by county. But Lumina also has access to nationwide. And so when we see our progress against other states, that's where we tend to look. And so sometimes they will give updates. And then as part of the CTE audit, we look at completions every year as one of their characteristics. So I don't know that there's one site where all of the information would be, but if there's something in particular somebody's looking for, we can certainly try to get it to them.
And I don't know if there's any more info, but the Florida College Access Network, I've seen some information about Sail to 60 on there. But Lumina sounds like maybe the best.
Data are updated annually. So that every year
Gotcha.
they do the stats again.
Okay. Another question we've got is, given the national trend of eliminating SAT and ACT scores as a requirement for acceptance in colleges, what is your view, and is that something that Florida institutions should move in or not?
I can answer that.
The system is open access, so we don't require an SAT or ACT score. So I'll leave that to other folks to answer that question.
I was just going to say, I think that's personally, I think that our state university system or state college system should make that decision. I honestly don't know if that's a statutory requirement or if that's a decision made by the Board of Governors for SUS. But I think our university system should have the flexibility to make that decision, or the autonomy to do it.
Clay could probably speak to this, but I remember, I want to say it was last year, it could have been the year before, the Board of Governors did take it up and discuss that as some schools in California were doing so. And I think at the time they decided, not to go in that direction. And just a side note, I want to say it was MIT who just announced a week or so ago that they had gotten rid of those test score requirements and they're now bringing them back. after they found they did have a difficult time figuring out whether students were ready to complete those kinds of programs, which is interesting.
Yeah, Sarah, a lot of that, especially the blog activity, was before my time at the university, and I don't know the undergrad implications to not looking at ACT, SAT scores. I know for graduate programs in light of the pandemic, some of the testing requirements were paused at least, and I don't think there's been a negative consequence there. It may not have been time for that to play out yet, but that could be some indicator for us to look at.
Sarah, I would add, this is a little bit tangential, but it's related. The one time that the colleges will use a SAT or an ACT score among a list of other options is when students want to qualify for dual enrollment. We also have a PERT test, which they can take, which is a test of college level English and math. And then just this past year, last session, Senate Bill 366 was one of my favorite bills that passed because it provided us an opportunity to allow students, whether it's for dual enrollment purposes or returning adults who are coming back to college, who are trying to be assessed to see if they need developmental education, which is pre-college work to get ready to do college English and math again. It provided the state board an opportunity to select alternative methods, alternatives to those assessments, common placement tests. And so we worked with K-12 very closely, and now the state board has adopted a rule where for another way to demonstrate that you're ready for college level English and math, either through dual enrollment or as a returning adult, is to look at GPA in specific courses. Like there's specific math courses and specific English courses that you can take in high school that, depending on your GPA in those courses, you can show that you are ready to now take a college level course in English or math. And a few other assessments that students would take as a normal course of being in high school, like a PSAT or something like that. So we have a lot of new options for students to use to demonstrate college readiness, so they can go to that next level. And we're pretty excited about it.
So here's a question you've probably gotten before, but maybe over time your answer has changed. Clay mentioned, during COVID, there were some emergency orders that changed some different requirements. There's all sorts of accommodations that were made to help students, help staff during this time. Are there any processes or policies or programs that were put in place specifically during the pandemic that you've decided, or your institution, or you have heard from institutions that are looking to keep because you found that it's just had a positive effect on students or staff?
I'd love to start if I could on that one, because I'll just pick up where I left off. That's where we got the idea for alternative methods is students couldn't get those exams to qualify for dual enrollment that first summer during COVID, and we needed to know if they were really ready, because you don't want a student to take a course and then fail it, because then it's on their permanent transcript. So that's where some of these methods came from, because once they did that for the summer and that fall of 2020, institutions said, this really is working. We could do this as a regular policy. And then that's when the state board had it as a priority on one of their legislative things, work with the legislature and colleges to have that added as a piece of legislation. And we're really grateful to the legislature doing that. I would also say in the college system, a lot of the things had to do with how they deliver things to students, whether it's financial aid processes or counseling, tutoring, library resources. There are a lot of things that we do a lot better now online or not face-to-face, because folks made accommodations and really beefed up those systems and learned a lot during the pandemic. So we're better at many of those things than we were before.
Anyone else have anything to add to that? Okay. Well, I have a very important question for Clay. And that is your prediction of FSU football record for 2022. This was an actual audience question.
Great question. Hey, so I'll answer that. I mean, I know it's somewhat tongue in cheek, but big time college athletics matters. I mean, it's an economic driver for the city and the state and the region. So I'll say this: I'm terrible at predictions, but I do think that I love our football coach. I think he's the right guy, and given time and resources, which I know he has, he'll do great things. So I'm excited about our football program, the direction that's headed. That might have been a little bit of a chicken jive move there, but I really believe that. So I'm excited about the future.
Awesome. Well, anything else you all want to share? Just anything that you've been working on, anything you're interested, or just anything else to add before we wrap up our conversation? And if you're in the audience and you have another question, this is your last chance. And by the way, we are going to, I said it at the top of the hour, but we are going to send an email with just kind of a summary of some of the bills that were passed this year. If any of those issues and budget issues that we didn't talk about on this webinar, we will have that, and that'll be sent out to all the attendees, everyone who registered. And this webinar is also recorded. So if you want to go back and look at anything, you can. And with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. We're going to end a little bit early. I don't want to take up anyone else's time. We're all busy. So thank you to our panelists. You were awesome. Appreciate your time. Chair Plasencia, appreciate your work in the legislature, your public service. I know you're going to go do great things in the private sector. Thank you, Clay, and thank you to our chancellor, who is doing amazing things with our Florida colleges. So appreciate everyone, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.